Hello and welcome to Breaking Bread with Rivaaj Maharaj, where nothing is off the table. For today's episode, I want to talk about the issues plaguing the European Union in the rivalry between Hungary, Ukraine, and Slovakia. So, without further ado, let's get into it. Recently, the EU has finalized a 90 billion euro package of assistance to Ukraine. So this means that Volodymyr Zelensky and his band of merry men now have 90 billion worth of euros that they can look at passing on some of those meager crumbs to the people, and how the majority of that can be then redirected and siphoned into their personal accounts. Not to mention, the British don't want to be outdone, so Keir Starmer has now decided to take British taxpayer money to the tune of £500 million and give it to the Ukrainians. So, I want to say that despite Zelensky looking depressed and crying and begging on the world stage and telling you how much he loves his people, it's all because it keeps his personal war chest growing even more, and those of his mates. That's all. These guys have stolen so much of money, it's not even funny. From now till the day they die, they can spend ludicrous amounts every day and they still won't run out of it. Yet that insatiable desire, that greed, keeps putting them at a position where they keep wanting to ask for more. And I think the world is starting to get fed up and weary of this. The Americans, we know, are definitely looking to wash their hands of it. I think once we have a change of government within Europe and the UK, the sense will dawn, because the British public are hurting right now. Kids are struggling, families are struggling, and we've got £500 million that we are just going to willy-nilly give to Zelensky, because apparently if Zelensky doesn't stop the Russians, then they are coming for us next. Well, is it possible that we could have done things to antagonize the Russians as well? No. We are these angels sitting in the clouds, just minding our business, having our coffees in these bohemian cafes, and the Russians are all the while being insidious and sinister and trying to upend our way of life. Because for some reason, the switch in our brain hasn't flipped, and we still see the Russians as communists. How that matters, how that is allowed to perpetuate, I don't know. It's insanity. But nevertheless, it's what flies, it's what the politicians use, it's the boogeyman that they always put so that they can pump money into all these projects, and we don't know what kickbacks get taken around. It's just a sick cycle of madness and theft at the expense of the British people, the Ukrainian people, the Russian people. It's just one whole disgrace. Nevertheless, the Hungarians refused, they vetoed the forwarding of that package of aid, that 90 billion euro to Ukraine. And I've got an article here from DW. EU asks Ukraine to repair Druzhba pipeline as Croatia offers alternative route. So the Hungarians have accused the Ukrainians of sabotaging the Druzhba pipeline, which supplied oil and let's say cheap Russian oil to Hungary and Slovakia. Now, emphasis on the word cheap, because the Croatians are now being drawn into this debacle. The problem is Ursula von der Leyen went to visit Zelensky to commemorate the 4th anniversary of this dastardly war that's going on in Ukraine, and to say to Zelensky, rather than now this is where the dichotomy exists, rather, so it's a war that you are saying is bad. It's a war that you are saying the Russians are killing millions, but you're not prepared to sit down and negotiate. Rather than say, we're stopping funding and we're forcing you, Mr. Zelensky, to sit at the table and reach a negotiated settlement, the line of reasoning we use is that while the war is bad, we'll keep giving you money to help continue the war. So how that makes sense, I don't know. But nevertheless, that was the reason for her visit. However, Viktor Orban, Hungary's prime minister, put an end to that and made sure that he vetoed that deal, so that deal couldn't go ahead, and Zelensky is still left with his begging bowl in his hand. The Hungarians have done that because they believe that the Ukrainians sabotaged the pipeline. The Ukrainians, Zelensky keeps saying, they've asked him, the reporters asked him, are you prepared to repair the pipeline? And he said, basically, yes, but. So there, he's going to drag his feet about it. But he says, what is the point? Because the Russians keep bombing civilian infrastructure. Now, let's understand something. The Russians went into Ukraine 4 years ago. If the bombing of civilian infrastructure was their top priority, then all these pipelines, electricity grids, railway lines, everything would have been taken out a long time ago. So let's just put that myth to one side. We know the Ukrainians, though, have targeted, the bridge, the civilian bridge, where civilians were killed. We know that they assassinated, I think it was Alexander Dugin's daughter. I can't remember her name. In Russia. So there are civilians that have actively been targeted by the Ukrainians. But again, that gets left by the wayside. I keep coming back to Gonzalo Lira, a U.S. citizen that was murdered by the Ukrainian special branch. Again, nothing, no flinching. It's part and parcel of it. And he was a civilian. We keep seeing these funds going into Ukraine. Nevertheless, Viktor Orban, because of that, and he's accused the Ukrainians of sabotaging that line, has put a stop to that money going to Zelensky. And Fico, I think the Prime Minister of Slovakia, or is it the President, has also come out because they were also receiving oil via that pipeline. Now, Croatia has been dragged into this debacle because Kaja Kallas believes that they need to find a solution, and the solution is providing oil. But notice I mentioned cheap Russian oil. That oil that needs to pass through needs to be the same price as the Hungarians are paying for the Russian oil, or cheaper. Because it doesn't make sense. You could get oil from another planet and put it through that pipeline, and if it costs 5 times the amount, it's not going to make sense for the Hungarians or the Slovakians to pay that price for that oil. Viktor Orban has said at the beginning, if the Germans and Italians and British and French want to go down this mad route of, enslaving their population to high energy bills, that's up to them. But it's something the Hungarians are not prepared to do. And rightly so. Our energy bills in the UK are insane. They are insane. How Keir Starmer is still in government, I don't know. No government should be allowed to be in power this long if it continues perpetuating these sickening policies. It just doesn't make sense. So the Croatian pipeline, which is called the Adria pipeline, it's an old Soviet pipeline, has now is now going to be put into operation because they find that is the alternative to the Druzhba pipeline while it is being repaired. However, I suspect that the price of the oil is going to be some issue. So let's say that oil coming through is not the same price as that of the Russians, then I'm sure Orban's going to definitely raise a stink about it. At which point, I think it's going to be up to the EU to decide whether they then want to subsidize that oil so that the excess that is meant to be paid is paid by the EU, or alternatively, they find a cheaper source of oil for the Hungarians. The Hungarians and Slovakians were receiving Russian crude oil through the Druzhba pipeline thanks to an open-ended sanctions exemption. Now, once that pipeline was damaged, and Viktor Orban has now leveled criticism at Ukraine for the damage to the pipeline or the sabotage to the pipeline, the Slovakians and the Hungarians have now begun tapping into their reserve oil supplies, which the EU countries keep as a backup. Now, these reserve oil supplies are meant to last for a 3-month period. So that means the EU needs to sort this matter out within that time, because that will exacerbate a crisis within Hungary and Slovakia. And Orban is not going to let it slide. It's actually going to play into him winning the next election, because it's a crisis that is unfolding. I think he's taking an issue and politicizing it for his benefit, which I think any politician in the world today would do. So this is why I think the EU are really scrambling to try and get this addressed. The article here goes on to say that while the Adria pipeline has sufficient capacity to meet the annual oil needs of Hungary and Slovakia, the two countries have insisted on their right to receive the significantly cheaper Russian crude they have contracted through the Druzhba pipeline. Do you see? The price is an issue. According to the Commission, Croatia is looking into the possibility of whether it can lawfully accept Russian crude at its port, both under the EU and US sanctions, but no decision in that direction has been made yet. At the end of the day, the Commission spokesman added, "What matters is that there will be oil that can be supplied to Hungary and Slovakia to meet their demands. And if we can find alternatives to Russian oil, the better. And then we don't have an issue with sanctions." Now, that last statement, therein lies the issue. Because Viktor Orban and Fico are saying, you need to supply us with cheap Russian oil, and emphasis again on the word cheap. The Croatians are looking to see if there are ways within the sanctions that can be circumnavigated so that Russian oil at that price can flow through to Hungary and Slovakia. However, the Commission spokesperson said that at the end of the day, what matters is that oil flows. Do you see? Your inability to put your foot into somebody else's shoe allows you this hubristic mentality to think that there's a problem, there's no oil, so we will give you oil. And it's simplified to that. Not realizing that the price of the oil is what matters as well. Because you can supply oil to Hungary and Slovakia at 200 times the price they're currently paying. You are now putting that burden on the Hungarian and Slovakian state and their people. And why should that be fair? If you think that supplying oil to them is the most crucial point and the price factor is immaterial, then that price discrepancy between the cheap Russian oil and the theoretically expensive oil that you plan to ship to them, that price difference you should meet, should come out of your pocket, because you see it simply as a supply and demand issue where you need oil, I'll give it to you. So you can already see that there's going to be an issue here, because if the oil is not cheaper or the same price as the Russian oil, again, the Hungarians are going to protest. The Slovakians are going to protest. And yes, you can say that they're doing this only to insist on Russian oil. Now, if you said it was Russian oil, if you honored the agreement by giving them oil and giving it to them at the same price, and they said it's Russian oil, then you can say to them, my friend, you can take this oil or you can leave it. Because we've honored the price and we've honored the fact that you need oil. Where it comes from is immaterial. Then the ball is back in their court. But as long as you say to them, we're giving you oil, and you're not taking into account that the price is what matters, you are leaving the door open for them to still argue the point on behalf of the Russians. You cut off their negotiating capabilities and capacity the moment you provide cheap oil. The moment you provide oil, and that oil is, if not the same value, the same price or cheaper than what the Russians are giving them. As long as you supply oil and care not of what price they pay, they will continue down this path of resistance. The moment the price is right and the supply of oil is right, they have no leg to stand on. But you see, the diplomacy within, this is what I say, the diplomats we have on the world stage today, they are so thick, they lack intelligence and the foresight. Because if your end game is to win them off Russian oil and you supply them with oil at a cheap price or cheaper than what the Russians are supplying, you've now closed off all other avenues for them to purchase Russian oil. But no, you say to them, I'm going to supply you at oil because oil is what you need and the price is immaterial. And then straight away, you have no leg to stand on, but yet you want to tell the world that what you are doing is right. A fair deal is supplying them with oil and supplying them with oil at the same or cheaper price. That is a fair deal. So we're going to keep an eye on this because I think this is going to be drawn out. The elections in Hungary are coming up. I think Orban, while the polls say that, he's trailing behind in double digits, we've heard the same thing about Donald Trump every time he stood for election. And we know what happened there. So I take what the polls say with a pinch of salt. I think that Orban will come in again. He's got the full backing of the United States in any event. So I don't think the Americans are going to allow Hungary to slip into a pro-European camp. They, in fact, are looking for more allies within Europe that share their mindset. So, yeah, we're going to keep a close eye on this and we'll keep you updated. Again, I want to thank you for spending time with us. We look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe as it helps us with the algorithm and it helps our channel to grow.